John walked through the desolate streets, his footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The world had changed, and he had survived it. For years, Earth had been battered by storms, earthquakes, and strange, violent events. It was as if the planet itself had grown angry, punishing humanity for something long forgotten. Buildings once teeming with life now stood like hollow skeletons, abandoned and crumbling under the weight of time. His journey had been long, but it was the past that haunted him the most. He had lost everything, his home, his family, his friends. Earth's fury had taken it all. Yet John was still alive. He didn't know how, but every day felt like a gift, a cruel joke played by the planet itself. As he stumbled into a small, nearly forgotten town, he saw the flickering lights of a bar in the distance. He hadn't had a drink in weeks, and his throat was dry from the long walk. Desperation pushed him toward the light, and soon he found himself standing in front of the bar, a small wooden sign hanging crookedly above the door. John hesitated for a moment. It was strange that a place like this still existed in the middle of so much devastation. But the lure of a drink, and perhaps some company, was too strong. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The bar was dimly lit, and the air was thick with the smell of old wood and stale liquor. A few tables were scattered around, but it was mostly empty. At the far end of the bar stood a man, the bartender. His face was weathered, with deep lines marking years of hardship. His hair was graying at the temples, and his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, seemed to be studying John as he entered. "Can I help you?" the bartender asked, his voice rough, like gravel scraping against stone. John looked around, unsure of what to say. It felt like the kind of place where a man could hide from his past, but also the kind where secrets were kept. "A drink. Whatever you have." The bartender didn't say a word, simply nodding as he reached for a dusty bottle behind the counter. As the drink was poured, John took a seat at the bar. His hands shook slightly as he brought the glass to his lips, the liquid burning down his throat. He hadn't realized how much he needed it. "You a survivor?" the bartender asked suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. John paused, not sure how to answer. There was something unsettling about the way the bartender asked the question. It wasn't just curiosity, it was something deeper, like he already knew the answer. "I've survived," John said, his voice low. The bartender didn't reply at first, just wiped down the counter with a rag. His eyes never left John, and the silence between them grew heavy. John tried to ignore the strange sensation that crept up his spine. There was something wrong about this place, something off about the bartender. "So," John said, trying to change the subject, "how long have you been here? How have you survived all this?" His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. The world outside had become a battlefield, and yet here was this man, standing alone in a bar, untouched by the chaos. The bartender smirked, as if John had asked an obvious question. "I've been around long enough," he said cryptically. "Longer than you'd think," John frowned. "What do you mean by that?" The bartender paused, his gaze shifting toward the windows, where the wind howled outside. "I've seen a lot, my friend. A lot more than you could understand." John leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What do you know about the storms? About what really happened to Earth?" The bartender's face darkened for a moment, and John caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, a deep, unsettling knowledge. "It wasn't just nature that did this," the bartender said quietly. "There's more at play here than you realize. Something much bigger than us." John felt his heart race. The bartender wasn't talking about natural disasters. He was talking about something else. Something John wasn't sure he wanted to know. "Who did this?" John demanded, leaning closer. "Who's responsible for all this?" The bartender smiled, a cold, knowing smile. "The question is, are you ready to hear the truth?" John's head swirled. The last few years had been filled with survival, but now it felt like something else was coming, something even darker. He couldn't back away now. He had to know. The bartender's eyes narrowed as he leaned in. "I didn't just survive the storms, John," he whispered. "I was part of them." John recoiled slightly, his mind struggling to process the words. "What do you mean you were part of them?" The bartender let out a low chuckle. "You think this was just the planet's rage? that it was a freak accident. No, my friend, it was orchestrated. Earth didn't just get angry. It was pushed. And those who pushed it, they didn't expect humanity to survive. John's heart thudded painfully in his chest. So what, you're saying someone made all this happen? The bartender nodded slowly. Yes, but that's just the beginning. You're part of something bigger than you know. Earth's fury wasn't an accident, and now humanity is about to face the consequences of its survival. John's blood ran cold. He had survived the storm, but now it seemed like the real storm was just beginning. Who are you? He whispered. The bartender stood up, straightening his back. I'm someone who's seen the truth, and now it's time for you to see it too. He walked over to a locked door behind the bar and opened it, revealing a small room filled with maps and strange devices. Come with me, John. There's much you need to know. John hesitated for a moment, the weight of the bartender's words sinking in. He had thought he was the last of humanity, wandering through the ruins of Earth, but now it seemed there was so much more to the story. Something darker, something bigger. He had no choice but to follow. As John stepped into the room, the door closed behind him, and the last remnants of Earth's fury began to unfold before his eyes. John followed the bartender into the small, dimly lit room behind the bar. The door clicked shut behind them, and the air inside felt heavier, thick with mystery. Maps covered the walls. Strange devices flickered on tables, and papers were scattered across the floor. It looked like the room of someone who'd been preparing for something far beyond ordinary survival. The bartender turned, his eyes colder than ever, and motioned for John to sit at a dusty chair. You need to know the truth, he said, his voice steady. What you've lived through, what you've seen on Earth, is just a fraction of what's coming. John stared at the strange symbols on the maps. They weren't like anything he had seen before. What's all this? What do you mean, what's coming? The bartender paced slowly in front of him, his eyes never leaving John's face. The storms, the earthquakes, the fires, they weren't just accidents of nature. They were caused deliberately by forces beyond your control. John's pulse quickened. You're saying it wasn't Earth? It wasn't natural? The bartender nodded grimly. Exactly. There are powers at work, hidden ones. I've been tasked to watch over Earth, to study the humans who survived, to observe how you all adapted. The world didn't end by accident. It was engineered. John leaned forward, his mind racing. Engineered? By who and why? What do you mean you were tasked to watch? The bartender's lips curled into a faint, bitter smile. By the ones who truly control the galaxy. The ones who think they know better than all of humanity. You see, Earth was never meant to survive. It was a test, a trial, a test for something much bigger. John's mind reeled. He had lived through chaos, but this was something different, something far darker than he had ever imagined. A test? For what? The bartender's eyes grew hard. For a war, John. A war that has been brewing for centuries. And humanity. You've been chosen. John stood up quickly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Chosen for what? You're telling me all of this was part of some plan? That my entire life, everything I've lost, was just a test? The bartender didn't flinch. Yes, the storms were a part of that plan. Earth's fury was meant to destroy, to break humanity. But you didn't break. You adapted. You fought back. And that's why you've been chosen. John took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. Chosen for what exactly? The bartender's gaze softened, but only slightly. To fight a war beyond your wildest imagination. The galaxy is full of powers, but they underestimated humanity. They didn't think you could survive. But you did. And now you're about to be thrust into a conflict that will decide the fate of more than just Earth. John could feel his heart racing. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. A war. The fate of the galaxy. Was he dreaming? I don't understand. Why me? Why us? The bartender stepped closer, his voice lowering. Because, John, you are one of the few who has lived through it all. The storms, the collapse, the chaos. You have seen what humanity is capable of. You are the key to the war that is coming. John shook his head, his thoughts spinning. I don't know anything about fighting a war like this. I'm just a survivor. A wanderer. The bartender gripped his shoulders firmly, his eyes burning with intensity. That's the thing, John. You don't have to know. You're part of something much bigger now. Humanity is already in the fight, whether you like it or not. But you have the strength to lead. John pulled away from the bartender, feeling a wave of panic rising in his chest. I'm not a leader. I can't lead anyone. I just want to survive. The bartender stepped back and sighed, looking at the floor for a moment before meeting John's eyes again. Surviving isn't enough anymore. The galaxy is changing, and Earth is at the center of it all. The war isn't just about survival. It's about proving that humanity is worth more than they ever thought. John's mind buzzed with 1,000 questions, but one stood out above the rest. How do you know all of this? How do you know what's coming? The bartender gave a quiet laugh, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Because I've seen it. I've seen the ships, the armies, the enemies. I've been part of this for a long time. And now I'm handing it off to you. John felt the weight of the words sink in, but before he could respond, the bartender reached for a small, hidden drawer in the corner of the room. He pulled out a sleek, metallic device, unlike anything John had ever seen before. It shimmered in the dim light, almost as if it were alive. This is your key, the bartender said, holding it out. It's a weapon. You'll need it when the time comes. John reached out cautiously, taking the device in his hands. It felt cold and heavy, and the metal seemed to hum with energy. A weapon? For what? For the war, the bartender replied, his tone hardening. The war that's coming, whether you're ready or not. John's fingers tightened around the device. The weight of the moment was almost too much to bear. He had thought he was done with surviving, done with fighting. But now it seemed like survival was just the beginning. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the uncertainty of the future settling over him like a storm. What had he gotten himself into? The bartender looked at him one last time. You're not alone in this, John. Others have been chosen. You'll find them when the time comes, but you must be ready. The war is coming and Earth's fury is just the beginning. John nodded, though his mind was still in a whirlwind. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. He wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was part of something much bigger, and whether he liked it or not, the war for Earth's future had already begun. With the device in his hand, John stepped toward the door, his future uncertain but undeniably entwined with the fate of the galaxy. The bartender watched him go, his expression unreadable. The war was coming, and John was about to be caught in its storm. John stepped out of the small room, his hand still gripping the strange metallic device the bartender had given him. The weight of it was strange, like it held a secret inside. His mind was spinning. He didn't know what he had just walked into, but it was bigger than anything he could have imagined. He had always thought surviving Earth's fury was the hardest thing he would ever do. Now it seemed like that was just the beginning. As he walked back into the bar, the silence felt different. It wasn't just the quiet of an abandoned town anymore. It was the silence of something waiting. The bartender was behind the counter, wiping down glasses, but his eyes never left John. Feeling better, the bartender asked, his voice calm but with a sharp edge. John didn't answer immediately. He didn't know how to. Everything felt too overwhelming. What's going to happen now? He finally asked, his voice hoarse. The bartender looked at him for a long moment before responding. You'll find out soon enough. It's already started. John's heart skipped a beat. Started? What do you mean? The bartender stepped forward, his face serious now. The storm, John. It's not just a weather event. It's a signal, a warning. The forces that orchestrated Earth's fury are watching. They've seen your survival. They know that humanity is stronger than they expected. John's breath caught in his throat. Who are these forces? What do they want? The bartender shook his head. I don't have all the answers, but I know enough to tell you this. You're not alone in this fight. Others like you are out there. Others who survived the worst and are ready to fight back. John couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. What am I supposed to do? I'm just me. I'm not a soldier. The bartender's lips curled into a tight smile. You're more than you think, And if you want to survive what's coming, you need to believe that. John stared at the bartender for a long time. He didn't know what to believe anymore. The world had changed, and so had he. He had once believed that survival was enough. But now he realized that simply surviving might not be enough. Not anymore. You'll need to find the others, the bartender said, breaking the silence. They'll help you. But don't waste any time. The war is already coming, and you'll need all the help you can get. John nodded slowly, trying to take it all in. How do I find them? The bartender gave him a hard look. They'll find you when the time is right. Just keep the device safe. It's the key. John looked down at the device in his hand, the cold metal feeling heavier than ever. How do you know all this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The bartender gave him a knowing smile. I've been around longer than you think, John, and now I'm passing the torch to you. It's your turn. John wanted to ask more questions, but the bartender had already turned away, going back to cleaning glasses. It was clear that there was nothing more to say. The bartender had given him the key to something bigger, but the next steps were his to figure out. With a deep breath, John turned and walked out of the bar. The wind howled outside, and the world felt even more desolate than before. He didn't know where to start, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't stay in this town any longer. The war was coming, and Earth's fury was just the beginning. As he walked down the empty streets, John couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It was an eerie, unsettling sensation, like eyes were following his every move. He quickened his pace, but the feeling didn't go away. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone there. But there was nothing, only the emptiness of the ruined world. John's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden flash of light. He froze, squinting into the distance. In the sky, he saw something, moving fast, heading toward the horizon. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a helicopter. It was something bigger, something far more advanced. His heart raced as he watched it disappear into the distance, its shape still clear in his mind. He turned and ran back to the bar. The door slammed open, and he rushed inside, his breath coming in short bursts. I saw something, he gasped. Something in the sky. The bartender didn't seem surprised. He simply looked at John with cold eyes. What did you see? A ship, John said, struggling to catch his breath. A big one. It was too fast, too powerful. The bartender's expression didn't change. You're not the first to see it. It's them. John's stomach twisted. Them? Who are they? The bartender paused, his gaze flickering to the door as if he were deciding whether or not to say more. Finally he spoke. The ones who have been watching. They were never meant to show themselves yet, but it seems your survival has caught their attention. And that's just the beginning. John's mind raced. He had thought he had seen the worst of it. Storms, earthquakes, disasters. But this was something else entirely. He had survived Earth's fury, but now he was being thrust into a battle that spanned far beyond the planet. I don't know if I'm ready for this, John admitted. His voice low. The bartender's eyes softened just for a moment. You don't have to be ready. You just have to fight. John looked down at the device in his hand, the cold metal a reminder of the war that was now unfolding. The world had been torn apart, and now it was up to him to fight for it. The question wasn't whether he was ready. It was whether humanity could survive the storm that was coming, and John had no choice but to find out. John walked through the empty streets, the strange metallic device still heavy in his hand. His mind was spinning with questions. The bartender had said the war was coming, that he was a key part of something bigger than he could understand. And now, that strange ship in the sky, what was it? Who were they? And what did it all mean for him? He had no answers, only the weight of the device and the lingering feeling that something was watching him. As the wind howled around him, John's thoughts began to drift back to the bartender's words. You're not alone. Others have survived. They'll help you when the time comes. The problem was, John didn't even know where to start looking for these others. As he rounded the corner of a crumbling building, something caught his eye, a flash of movement. His heart skipped a beat. He froze. Was someone following him? He turned quickly, but the street was empty. No one was there. But the sense of being watched remained, like eyes were hidden just out of view. Shaking off the unease, John continued his walk, trying to focus on the task ahead. The device in his hand seemed to pulse with an energy he couldn't explain, and he had the sudden, overwhelming urge to find someone, anyone who could explain what was happening. It wasn't long before he reached the edge of the town. The buildings grew sparse, the streets empty, the silence broken only by the occasional sound of rustling leaves or a distant crash. Then in the distance he saw it, a small campfire burning in the shadows. The smoke rose in a thin trail, and for the first time in days, John felt a glimmer of hope. He approached cautiously, not sure what to expect. The world had changed, and trust wasn't something he could afford easily. As he got closer, he saw a figure sitting by the fire, their face hidden in the shadows. The figure was tall, wearing a heavy cloak, and they didn't seem to notice John's approach. "Hello?" John called out, his voice hesitant but steady. The figure's head snapped up, and for a moment they just stared at him. The fire flickered, casting eerie shadows on the person's face. Slowly, they stood and stepped into the light. It was a woman. Her face was scarred, her eyes sharp, but there was something familiar about her presence. "You're alone," she said, her voice low but firm. "Not many dare to travel through these parts." John didn't know how to respond. The sense of danger that had clung to him since the bartender's warning was still there, and it seemed to pulse stronger in the presence of this woman. "I'm looking for answers," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's happening. I've seen things. Ships, strange forces, the bartender. He said I'm part of something bigger." The woman's eyes narrowed as she stepped closer, studying him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "The bartender, huh?" she muttered. "That old fool. He was right about one thing. You are part of something. But you're not the only one." She motioned for him to sit by the fire. John hesitated for a moment, then took a seat, his eyes never leaving her. "What do you mean I'm not the only one?" he asked, his voice low. The woman sighed, her eyes flickering to the flames. "There are others like you, survivors, chosen for a reason, just like you were. The storm didn't just happen by chance, you know. It was a test. And now the real battle begins." John leaned forward. "A test for what?" The woman looked at him with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "For a war. A war against forces you can't even begin to imagine. The storm, the chaos, it was a way to break humanity. But you didn't break. That's why you're here now. You've been chosen to fight." John's chest tightened. "Fight? I'm not a soldier. I don't even know who or what I'm fighting." The woman chuckled bitterly. "No one knows at first. That's the point. They want to test your survival instinct, your ability to adapt. You've done that. Now you'll have to learn to fight." She paused, studying him carefully. "You already have what you need. That device in your hand, it's not just a weapon. It's the key to everything." John stared down at the device, his mind racing. "But how do I use it? The bartender said it's important, but he didn't explain how it works." The woman's eyes softened for a moment. "You'll learn in time, but first you have to find the others. They'll help you. They've been waiting for you just like you've been waiting for them." John felt a strange mix of fear and determination. He wasn't sure he was ready for this. He had barely survived the chaos of Earth's fury, and now he was supposed to fight a war against unknown enemies with nothing but a device he didn't understand. "But where do I find them?" he asked, his voice strained. The woman stood up, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "They'll find you. The war is already underway, and you'll be pulled into it whether you're ready or not. Just remember one thing, the key you hold will lead you to the truth. It will guide you when the time comes." Before John could respond, the woman turned and began walking away. "Wait," he called out. "What's your name?" She didn't look back. "Names don't matter anymore," she said over her shoulder. "The only thing that matters is survival, and if you're smart, you'll trust the key. It will show you the way." John stood there for a long moment, watching her disappear into the shadows. He wanted to chase after her, to demand more answers, but something told him that now wasn't the time. The answers would come, but they would come at a price. With a deep breath, John turned back to the campfire. The device in his hand was cold, almost pulsing with a strange energy. Whatever the future held, he knew one thing: he wasn't alone in this fight. The war had already begun, and his part in it was just beginning. He had to find the others. And soon, John stood alone, staring into the distance where the woman had disappeared. Her words echoed in his mind. "The war is already underway," she had said. "Find the others. Trust the key." He wasn't sure what to think. Everything felt like it was happening too quickly. One minute he was a survivor of Earth's fury, trying to make sense of the chaos, and the next he was holding a strange device that seemed to pulse with energy. It was overwhelming. He turned and started walking, his mind racing with questions. Where were the others? How would he find them? The woman had said they would find him, but he couldn't just sit around waiting. He needed answers. He needed to understand what was happening to Earth and why he was a part of it. Hours passed as he wandered through the desolate streets, the weight of the device growing heavier with each step. The air was thick with the remnants of the storm, the earth still shaking as if it hadn't fully recovered. Everything felt different now. The world had changed, and so had he. As night fell, John found himself on the outskirts of a small town. The lights were dim, and most of the buildings looked abandoned, just like everything else. He walked toward a shabby diner, its neon sign flickering weakly in the night. It didn't look like much, but it was the only place with any sign of life. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The diner was empty, except for a man sitting at the counter. He was older, with graying hair and a rough look in his eyes. When John entered, the man glanced up but said nothing. John hesitated for a moment, then approached the counter. "Mind if I sit?" John asked, his voice quiet. The man shrugged. "It's a free world," he muttered, not bothering to look at him again. John took a seat and ordered a cup of coffee. As he waited, he glanced around the diner. There was nothing unusual about the place, except for the strange feeling in the air. The storm outside still lingered, like a dark cloud hanging over everything. As John took a sip of his coffee, the man finally spoke. "You're not from around here, are you?" John looked up, surprised. "No," he said slowly. "I'm just passing through." The man studied him for a moment, his eyes sharp. "Passing through, huh? You look like you're looking for something." "Everyone is these days." John frowned. "What do you mean?" The man leaned in slightly, his voice lowering. "The world's different now, kid. People are looking for answers. They want to know what happened, why it happened, and what comes next. Some of us are just trying to survive, but there are others. And they're looking for more than survival." John's heart skipped a beat. Could this man know something? "What kind of people?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The man looked around, then leaned in even closer. "People who were chosen like you. You're not the only one, you know. The others are out there. You just have to find them." John's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't told the man anything about the bartender or the device. How did he know? "How do you know about that?" he asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. The man smiled faintly, but there was something unsettling in his eyes. "I know more than you think. I've been following the signs, watching the patterns. The storm was just the beginning. It's all part of something bigger, something you can't fully understand yet." John leaned forward, his fingers gripping the edge of the counter. "What is it? What's coming?" The man's smile faded, and for a moment he looked like he might say something important. But just then, the door to the diner opened with a creak, and two figures stepped inside. They were both dressed in black, their faces hidden by hoods. They moved quickly, silently, like shadows. The man at the counter stiffened, his eyes darting toward the door. "Trouble," the man muttered under his breath. John's heart raced as the figures approached. Something about them felt wrong. He didn't know who they were, but he had a feeling they weren't here for a friendly chat. The two figures stopped at the counter, and without a word, one of them placed a small device on the table in front of John. It looked similar to the one he had been given by the bartender, but smaller, more compact. John froze, his mind racing. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely audible. The figure who had placed the device on the counter spoke, their voice cold and emotionless. "You have something that belongs to us," they said, their eyes hidden behind the shadows of their hood. John's pulse quickened. "I don't know what you're talking about." The figure reached forward, grabbing John's arm with surprising strength. "You know exactly what we mean. The device. Hand it over." The man at the counter stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Leave him alone," he growled, his eyes hardening, but the figures didn't move. They didn't even acknowledge the man. Instead, the second figure stepped forward, placing a hand on the device on the table. A soft beep echoed through the room, and the device flickered to life, glowing with an eerie light. John felt a chill run down his spine. The device, whatever it was important, and these people were determined to get it back. The man at the counter stepped forward, but before he could say anything, the figures moved in unison, each of them pulling out a sleek black weapon from beneath their cloaks. John's breath caught in his throat as the cold steel gleamed under the dim lights of the diner. "Hand over the device," the figure repeated, their voice colder than ever. John looked down at the device, then back up at the figures. He knew he couldn't hand it over, not without answers. Not without understanding what was happening. "I'm not giving it to you," he said, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and resolve. The man at the counter made a move, but before he could act, the figures suddenly stepped back. They were watching him, waiting. Then, without a word, they turned and disappeared into the night, leaving only the faint echo of their footsteps behind. John sat there, breathless, his hands still gripping the device. What had just happened? Who were they? And why did they want the device so badly? The man at the counter sat back down, shaking his head. "You're in deeper than you think, kid," he said, his voice low. "This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about choosing sides." John didn't say anything. His mind was too overwhelmed by everything that had just occurred. The war, the device, the mysterious figures. It was all too much. But one thing was clear. Things were spiraling out of control. And he had no choice but to keep moving forward. He had no idea what was coming. But he knew one thing. He couldn't do it alone. John's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the spot where the two figures had disappeared into the night. The diner was silent again, save for the distant hum of the broken neon lights outside. He still had the device, the one that everyone seemed to want. The one that could change everything. His fingers tightened around it, as if its cool metal could somehow steady his racing thoughts. "You really should have handed it over," the man at the counter said, his voice gruff but oddly calm. "Those people? They don't take kindly to losing." John turned to face him, feeling the weight of the situation sinking in. "Who were they? What do they want with the device?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he grabbed the coffee pot, pouring himself a cup. "Those were no ordinary people. They're part of the group you're going to be fighting soon enough. The one that's been watching you, watching all of us." John felt his stomach twist. He had expected trouble, but not like this. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why is this device so important?" The man leaned back in his chair, his eyes flicking to the door, as if making sure they weren't being followed. "It's not just a weapon. It's a key to the truth. But you're not ready for that yet." He looked at John with a hardened gaze. "You need to find the others, the ones who can help you understand it." John felt a surge of frustration. "I'm tired of chasing shadows," he said, slamming the table with his fist. "I want answers. I want to know what's going on, why Earth was torn apart, why I'm being dragged into this." The man's expression softened slightly, but his eyes remained serious. "You're right. It's not just about survival anymore. It's about what happens next. And you're caught in the middle of it." John's mind raced. He had no idea what the man meant by that. He only knew that the world had changed. Earth had been torn apart by storms and disasters, and now people were fighting over something he barely understood. And he was part of it, whether he wanted to be or not. "What is this group you're talking about?" John asked, his voice steady, though his heart was still hammering in his chest. "They call themselves the Ascendants," the man said, his voice low. They've been watching humanity for years, pulling the strings from the shadows. They control things you wouldn't believe. They were behind the storms. They're the ones who pushed Earth to the edge. And now they want to finish the job. John shook his head. Why? Why do they want to destroy us? The man's gaze hardened. Because they think we're a threat. They think humanity's survival is a mistake. They think you're too dangerous to let live. John took a step back, feeling the weight of the words. But I survived, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I made it through. Doesn't that prove something? The man's lips twisted into a tight smile. It proves you're strong, sure. But it also proves that humanity has the will to fight back. That's why they're coming for you. They want to take you out before you can rally the rest of us. John's mind was spinning. The ascendants, the storm, the device. It was all connected somehow, but the pieces were too scattered for him to make sense of it. He didn't know what he was supposed to do, but one thing was clear. He couldn't face this alone. Where do I find the others? He asked. The man's eyes softened. You already know where they are. You've met them already. But you've got to trust yourself. Trust the device. John stared down at the small metal object in his hand, the strange energy it emitted still sending a shiver up his spine. It felt like it was alive, like it was calling to him. What happens if I don't trust it? He asked, looking up at the man. The man's eyes flickered with something close to pity. Then you'll never understand what's coming, and you'll never be ready for what they'll do next. John swallowed hard, his mouth dry. He didn't know if he could trust the device or the man in front of him. He didn't know if he could trust anyone. But the world was changing, and the answers were out there. He couldn't back down now. Suddenly, there was a sound outside, the soft scraping of boots on pavement. John's heart skipped a beat. He turned toward the door, his hand instinctively tightening around the device. They've found you, the man said, standing up quickly. You need to go, now. Before John could react, the man shoved the device into his hand, forcing it into his palm with a sense of urgency. Get out of here, he said, his voice sharp, and don't stop until you find the others. John didn't ask questions. He didn't have time. He turned and bolted for the door, the cold night air hitting him like a slap in the face. He sprinted down the street, his breath coming in quick gasps as his mind raced. Behind him he heard footsteps, heavy footsteps. Then a voice. Don't run, John, the voice called out, cold and mocking. You can't hide from us. John's pulse quickened. He didn't know who they were, but he knew they were dangerous. They were part of the group that had caused the storms. The ones who had torn the world apart. He didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. Not now. The chase continued through the empty streets, his heart pounding in his chest. Every step he took seemed to echo louder than the last, each breath more labored than the one before, and then, as he rounded a corner, he saw them. The figures, shadowy, indistinct, moving quickly through the darkness. They were closing in. John's thoughts raced. There was nowhere to go, no place to hide. But then he remembered the device, the key. He gripped it tightly in his hand, and in that moment he knew what he had to do. He didn't know how, but somehow the device was going to lead him to the others, and he had to trust that it would. With a final desperate sprint, John pushed forward, his eyes focused on the shadows ahead. He wasn't alone in this fight. He couldn't be. The future of Earth depended on it.